Yeah. So to me, one of the most significant findings in neuroscience in the last 75 years is that pleasure and pain are co-located, which means the same parts of the brain that process pleasure also process pain. And they work like a balance. So when we feel pleasure, our balance tips one way. When we feel pain, it tips in the opposite direction. And one of the overriding rules governing this balance is that it wants to stay level. So it doesn't want to remain tipped very long to pleasure or to pain. And with any deviation from neutrality, the brain will work very hard to restore a level balance, or what scientists call homeostasis. And the way the brain does that is with any stimulus to one side, there will be a tip in equal and opposite amount to the other side.
It's like the principal laws of physics.
Yes, right, yeah. Right. So like I like to watch YouTube videos. When I watch YouTube videos of American Idol, it tips to the side of pleasure. And then when I stop watching it, I have a come down, right, which is a tip to the equal and opposite amount on the other side. And that's that moment of wanting to watch one more YouTube video, right?
Well, yeah. And I just want to interject there. So this moment of wanting to watch another that is associated with pain, I think, are we always aware of that happening? Because you just described it in a very conscious way.
Right.
But when I indulge in something I enjoy, I'm usually thinking about just wanting more of that thing. Yes. I don't think about the pain. I just think about more.
Right. So really excellent point, because we're mostly not aware of it. And it's also reflexive. So it's not something that consciously happens or that we're aware of unless we really begin to pay attention. And when we begin to pay attention, we really can become very aware of it in the moment. Again, it's like a falling away, like that, you're on social media and, you get a good tweet of something, and then you can't stop yourself because there's this awareness, a latent awareness that as soon as I disengage from this behavior, I'm going to experience a kind of a pain, right? A falling away, a missing that feeling, a wanting more of it. And of course, one way to combat that is to do it more, right? And more and more and more. So I think that is really what I want people to tune into and get an awareness around, because once you tune into it, you can see it a lot. And then when you begin to see it, you have, and if you keep the model of the balance in mind, I think it gives people kind of a way to imagine what they're experiencing on a neurobiological level and understand it. And in that understanding, get some mastery over it, which is really what this is all about. Because ultimately, we do need to disengage, right? We can't live in that space all the time, right? We have other things we need to do. And there are also serious consequences that come with trying to repeat and continue that experience or that feeling. Impulsivity is a little bit different. And by the way, impulsivity is not always bad, right? Impulsivity is that thing where there's not a lot of self-editing or worrying about future consequences. You have the idea to do something and you do it. And of course, we can imagine many scenarios where that's absolutely wonderful. There can be a sort of, let's say, intimate interactions between people where you wouldn't really want to be super inhibited about it, right? You would want to be disinhibited and impulsive. I can also imagine sort of fight or flight scenarios, like battle scenarios, right? Where it would really be good to be impulsive and just go, rah, just
where hesitation can cost you your life.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But, and I think this brings up a really, something that I've come to believe after 25 years of practicing psychiatry is that what we now conceptualize in our current ecosystem as mental illness are actually traits that in another ecosystem might be very advantageous. They're just not advantageous right now because of the world that we live in. And I think, impulsivity is potentially one of those, right? Because we live in this world that's sort of like you have to constantly be thinking sort of rationally about the consequences of X, Y, or Z. And it's such a sensory rich environment, right? That we're being bombarded with all of these opportunities, these sensory opportunities, and we have to constantly check ourselves. And so impulsivity is something that right now can be a difficult trait, but isn't in and of itself a bad thing.
I see.
But somewhere along in the middle of my life, I discovered the Twilight Saga. For those of you who don't know, that's a vampire romance novel written for teenagers, and it absolutely transported me. I read the whole series 4 times through. Then a friend recommended to me that I get a Kindle. Getting that Kindle was crucial from transitioning me from recreational romance reading to addictive romance reading. All of a sudden with the Kindle, I had easy, instantaneous access to highly reinforcing books that I could now get for cheaper and cheaper amounts. I could get them even for free. Amazon, like any good drug dealer, knows the value of a free sample. Extremely anxious. And when doctors get anxious, just like when everybody else gets anxious, what do? We call on our primitive defense mechanisms. And defense mechanisms is a psychoanalytic concept from Freud that talks about what we do unconsciously as opposed to a coping strategy, which is something we do consciously. But a defense mechanism is something we do unconsciously when we cannot tolerate our feelings or our current reality. So for example, if I'm feeling anxious, then I may call on a defense mechanism in order to decrease my anxiety in the moment, but I will do it unconsciously. I won't know that it's happening. So a very common defense mechanism is denial, where I just simply deny that that reality is happening. And by denying that reality, I don't have to deal with it. Another common defense mechanism is projection. Projection means that I take my uncomfortable feelings, my rage, my sadness, my anxiety, and I project it onto another human being, and that way I don't have to deal with it. So I'm not angry, you're angry. Splitting is where we divide people into good people and bad people because we can't tolerate the ambiguity of a person being both good and bad. This happens between drug-seeking patients and compassionate doctors when they lump the drug-seeking patient into my bad patient category. Someone who used marijuana so heavily that it destroyed many aspects of his life. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
So to me,
He didn't have proper motivation.
right, he wasn't motivated, it interfered with his ability to perform in his job. So that is what we call addiction. We call that addiction.
But it's not. He had no chemical dependency at all. When he decided to stop, he stopped without any withdrawal symptoms.
Yeah, so this is a great teaching moment. Thank you so much, because the point that you're making is that because he wasn't physiologically dependent, he wasn't addicted. But as it turns out, you don't need to be physiologically dependent to meet criteria for an addictive disorder. If you have, so how do we define somebody who's become addicted? Basically, you have to think of the 3 C's: control, compulsion, and consequences. People who are addicted are people who have lost control of their own use. Someone who said, I was just going to drink a couple of beers, and 12 beers later, okay? Compulsive use. This is people who spend an enormous amount of their mental real estate thinking about obtaining the substance, using the substance, recovering from the substance, lying about the substance. That's compulsion. The 3rd C is consequences. People who have serious consequences due to their use. That can be consequences at their job, consequences in their meaningful relationships, legal consequences like getting a DUI. That's the 3rd C, especially if there is continued use despite those consequences. So that's how we define addiction. And based on that very brief anecdote, it sounds like your friend was addicted because of the serious consequences that he had. But I agree with